This notion of invisibility is kind of running through all of the pictures too. Even in the aerial images that I'm making of these weapons testing sites, there are no weapons actually being detonated. So how do you represent that which you actually can't see? It became sort of part of the whole process. I make photographs that consider how we humans have been transforming the Earth, looking at sites at a really vast scale that had undergone a kind of biblical transformation. In 2003, I was working on a project called Terminal Mirage around the periphery of the Great Salt Lake. And one of the sites I encountered was this military installation, the Tooele Army Depot. 42% of the nation's expired chemical weapons are stored at this site. And it led me to the source for many of these expired chemical weapons. Dugway Proving Ground was established in 1942 as a site for the military to test chemical and biological weapons. It is off limits to civilians, and it is still an active military installation of some 800,000 acres. The lab is called WSLAT, which stands for the Whole Systems Live Agent Test Chamber. It was a lab that was inaugurated within maybe a matter of days after I was visiting here. So I was allowed to work here because it didn't yet contain any toxins. It's a very chilling environment for good reasons. Every site that I was permitted to work at had been vetted. And there was one moment where we were driving from point A to point B across this barren desert landscape where I saw a building that I had known nothing about. It became a kind of enigmatic structure that kind of condensed a lot of my interests in how Dugway uses the landscape in this kind of hyper-rational way. And I'm working my way around it. Note how the landscape behind it changes so dramatically from essentially an open plain in the first 3 images to then seeing these, this sort of vast backdrop of these very rugged mountains behind it. We devote quite a lot of space to this, this particular building, and it's in fact a double gatefold. So you get to encounter it and then move around it and see it from almost all sides, but in fact not all sides. I stopped that revolution about 2/3 of the way through. So there's always some part of it that's actually remaining hidden, and that in a way was referencing the fact that although I am permitted to work at Dugway, there's a lot that is still off limits. And it had that kind of resonance with ideas I had had all along about accessing sites that are on the map but hidden. Its function is for it and its shadow, actually, really, to be seen by Air Force pilots as they make their way over the building to an Air Force bombing site. As these toxins are released from a central gurney, essentially, and as they disperse across the land, there would be these devices set on the edge of these circles that would take measurements of the atmosphere. The grid that I am superimposing on each of these aerial images, that was something I came to as I was thinking about the ways in which this land is used by the military as a measuring device. The American West, for me, is the site where the settlers of this country had this sense of manifest destiny, and they sort of set out this exploratory expeditions and mapped the American West. Looking at things from above, I sort of got it. These X's that are sort of inscribed into the landscape, some of them appeared right away, right? but some of them were sort of fainter and more obscured. That mapping is interlinked to the development and in some ways the ruination of the American West. The changes that we are making to the Earth are accelerating more and more and more. The issues are becoming much more difficult to ignore, impossible to ignore, and affecting us more widely and more deeply. So yeah, perhaps I'm like the canary in the coal mine.